Hello everyone, I'm Ash Compton, and for this video I wanted to show you how to land back at the KSC with confidence, whether it be from a low Kerbin orbit, or from one of Kerbin's moons, or even interplanetary travel, which is a notoriously difficult challenge. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of re-entry and actually be able to land back at the KSC. Also, if you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I don't have many subscribers, so it means a lot to me to see that number go up. Anyway, before I get to the main point of the video, I have to define the boundaries of the KSC. Some people might disagree, but I say that the KSC is the area inside of the flat plane surrounding the actual KSC buildings. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on with the video. Re-entry is complicated and different for every craft, so I'll only be showing the ones I think are most commonly used. Starting with the classic Mark I command pod, I'll also show the space shuttle design later on. For the first demonstration, I'll put this pod up into simple low Kerbin orbit, and we'll start from there. Once you're in orbit, you'll have to wait for the craft to be on the opposite side of Kerbin from the KSC. Once you get there, quick save and immediately deorbit. We go to the opposite side of Kerbin from the KSC because when you deorbit, you usually end up on the opposite side of the planet. Therefore, to land back at the KSC, you have to deorbit roughly on the other side of the planet. Anyway, this is where things get complicated. In essence, what this video is about is an algorithm. You deorbit to a certain periapsis, wait to see where you land, and if you land short of the KSC, reload the quick save, deorbit again, but don't lower your periapsis as much. This will make you go further, as you experience less drag as quickly as you did in the previous attempt. If you go too far, reload that quick save, deorbit again, but bring your periapsis down lower than it was in the previous attempt. If you remember what periapsis is, or maybe periapsi, I don't know, just the plural form of periapsis, if you remember those from previous attempts, you can narrow down the range of periapsises where you might land at the KSC, and eventually you will get back to the KSC. For example, deorbiting to 40 kilometers might make you undershoot the KSC, and deorbiting to 45 kilometers might make you overshoot the KSC. So then you can know for sure that deorbiting somewhere between 40 and 45 kilometers will land you back at the KSC. And that's what you do over and over for it usually takes me about an hour. Now, here in the video, this is actually the final attempt where I did successfully land, and I had to lower my periapsis to about 53 kilometers. I just want to say as a sort of disclaimer though, if you try doing it and deorbiting at 53 kilometers, there's a pretty good chance that you won't actually land back at the KSC, and that's because you will be at, or you'll most likely be somewhere different in the orbit relative to the KSC from where I was, if that makes sense. So if you try this on your own and it doesn't work, that's probably why. So don't hate on me, I'm not using cheats either. Moving on to the next craft, which is a space shuttle-like design, there are a few differences between deorbiting a space shuttle and deorbiting a pod. When you deorbit a command pod, there is a heat shield and a clear orientation for the craft to take as it re-enters the atmosphere, which is of course retrograde. Now, when you have a space plane, there is no heat shield of course, so the problem is, this is a bit like a science experiment where you have an independent variable and then you have constant variables. You want the independent variable to change, and you want the constants to stay the same, and that way you can say, hey, the independent variable affects so-and-so in such a way. And so normally, before in the command pod example, the periapsis from your deorbiting burn would be the independent variable, but with a space shuttle or a space plane, you can also control and change your orientation that you maintain. So there, in that first attempt, I was maintaining about a, I think 20-degree pitch above the horizon, so just pointing about 20 degrees up, and that generates a lot of lift, so it made me way overshoot the KSC in that example. And here, just to demonstrate it, how orientation can also be the difference between whether or not you land back at the KSC, I actually deorbited to the same exact periapsis in the second attempt, but instead of pitching up to 20 degrees, I pitched up to 40 degrees. And that makes you experience a lot more drag, where the craft experienced a lot more drag. And so also one of the luxuries of a spaceplane is that you can change your orientation around as you're going in orbit. So here, at first, I thought I was going to come in short, so then I lowered my pitch so that I would experience less drag, and then I was experiencing too little drag, so then I had to just dive bomb and go straight down, probably ripping Jeb's soul out of his body, but, you know, he's fine. And then also, funny story here, the landing legs on this thing, or I guess the wheels, for some reason, when I would land on the runway, like normal, it would just horrifically tip forward and kill Jeb every time. So I went with something that's a little bit unusual. I simply just gracefully slid up the air and landed on top of the VAB, keeping the entire vehicle in, I don't want to say in construction. That was, for some reason, the first thing that came to my mind. Fully assembled, I guess. Anyway, though, moving on from that design, this is just a clip from a Reddit post that I made a few days ago. Don't bother looking for it in that Reddit post, though. This is just from the source material. And basically, I'm just coming back from Minmus, and I wanted to include this so that I could show just an example, real example, of what it's like coming back from one of Kerbin's moons, if you wanted to land back at the KSC, which I did. So basically, with Minmus, one of the biggest problems is going to be inclination, because Minmus has its own inclination, and then there's kind of like a wonky thing where if you're just in an equatorial orbit around Minmus, that'll give you, like, Minmus's inclination when you come out of orbit from Minmus, I guess, and go into orbit around the, I almost said around the Earth, around Kerbin. So you do have to fix your inclination, and then also you would probably have to do that if you were coming back from the Mun, because we're not perfect at flying these things, right? You know, only Mech Jeb is. Anyway, though, something that's important to point out here, though, I did things a little bit differently. So basically, I error braked, keeping the engine and fuel tanks on the first time around, so that I could get into a lower orbit and control my periapsis still. The thing is, this doesn't work for coming in from interplanetary travel, usually, because it'll blow up the fuel tanks. So I was able to do this, and you'll probably be able to do this for, or you'll definitely be able to do this coming back from one of Kerbin's moons, simply because you're already in orbit around Kerbin, so you can just go super high up. You can just do your air brakes super high, and just really slowly bring it down and not have to deal with things exploding. But in this example, which was meant to simulate coming in from interplanetary travel, that is not the case. So here I just kind of cheated the original craft, I guess. It's not really the original craft, it has the stuff on the bottom, but it's just the same command pod with the heat shield on the bottom. I just cheated that into a really high orbit around Kerbin, and the way that this demonstrates coming in from interplanetary travel is because you're coming in from somewhere very fast, and then you also can't control which side of the planet your periapsis is on. That's why we waited for the craft to be all the way around the other side of the globe in the first example. It's because then the periapsis will be roughly over Kerbin, or not Kerbin, the KSC. Here, when you're coming in from interplanetary travel, you can't do that. But what you can do is actually literally go back out of the atmosphere. If you go to the right altitude, you will actually pop out of the atmosphere, and you can come all the way back around Kerbin, and you can come back to the KSC. It's totally nuts. This took me like 2 hours to perfect, but I finally got it, and then I screwed it up. This pissed me off. Just here, I wasn't certain if I was going to really land back at the KSC or if it was going to be a dud and I was going to land in the darker hilly greens. So I kind of panicked and I just forgot to press space and killed Jeb. by not deploying the parachute. Here, I did not make that same mistake, at least as far as you know. You don't get to see what happens before I just reload the quick saves. So, yeah. But as far as you know, Jeb's fine here. Basically, what I'm demonstrating here also is that you can actually control your motion using a command pod, using the reaction wheels. It generates lift. And so I was able to gently glide back to more the center of the KSC. So you can do that if you do want to land back on the runway or on one of the buildings. You can do that to make it a little bit easier on yourself. Anyway, though, that wraps it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe, leave a comment, like this video. But either way, hopefully I will see you next time.